Welcome to East Meets West, and today we have Dr. Dot with us, and Dr. Dot is very intelligent and a lot of things, he challenged my thinking with. And so I love having him here, and we argue and discuss many things back and forth. But today we're talking about his new book. Yes, he has written other books, which maybe he can mention to us in a few. The book actually is about, the title is Before the West Worked, Africa Worked. And it's more of an African theology of work. So Dr. Dot is very insightful of some of the things that came out in this book here and what he's talking about. And if I may give a little, very short context. So what the book talk about is that Africa's work crisis is not a crisis of capacity or character. It's a crisis of narrative. And the narrative was dismantled by slavery, colonialism, and a Western sacred secular theology. And so the book then proposes recovery through Ubuntu, pre-colonial economic wisdom, and the biblical tradition. So Dr. Dot, welcome to East Meets West, and I'm looking forward to hear more about this whole aspect of this narrative and the different problems we're having. I would say not only in Africa, but something you're seeing spill over all over in the world. But welcome, and before I ask you anything about this book, tell us, so what were some of the previous book you wrote, or books?
Thank you very much, Dr. Shanti. Thank you for the opportunity you've given me to come and talk about this book on your channel. I've written journals, but the last book I wrote, that was about 3 years ago, which was a compilation of my reflective journals. I call it Musings. It's available on Amazon. Musings, and I call it The Reflections of a Burdened Soul. So a lot of my write-ups are based on my personal reflections about how I see life, how I see people, how I see societies, how I see, and they all come out of my area of specialization, which is human capital development, transformational leadership, and workplace studies. So the last book I wrote was about 3 years ago. That was in 2023. It's titled Musings. I've written a lot of other journals. I was a co-contributor to a project by �W𝐚𝐻𝐼𝐸𝐻, which is the product of the outcome of a conference we had in Panama years ago. And I contributed to a chapter there which talks about work again, about people looking at work from different perspectives, that some works are sacred, some are secular, and all of that. And some of those thoughts are also included in this work. I can't write without writing about work because it's my area of specialization, passion, and I'm a student of workplace studies. So that's what I've done, so far. Even my doctoral dissertation was on work, but in a particular area, how people can use their work as a tool for transformational leadership. So that's been what I've been involved with over the years. So this particular one is specifically about telling the African story from an African perspective. The main premise of the book is that, to a large extent, a lot of, previously colonized territories were never given the opportunity of telling their stories by themselves, Africa inclusive. Their stories have been told by others. And we have a saying in Africa that if a hunter tells a story, he will also have a position why he's a predator, and he will be able to justify himself. So this is just an opportunity for me to, sort of stir the waters there, that Africa has a story and is better rendered by an African. Yeah, that's basically the premise. And the statement you made actually summarized the book, that the challenge that Africa has is not a challenge of capacity, it's not a challenge of character, It's a challenge of narrative that we have bought into. And that is what will affect the character and will also undermine the capacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what really inspired you to write this book?
This book was, the story is long. And I think it started way back in 2008. My first time of actually having a close contact with an African American friend that was my lecturer, eventually became my friend. And then I saw something in this young man that, gave me a very graphic illustration of the effect of when humans are not allowed to be themselves. I saw the effect of colonization, of slavery, of, people being coerced to work rather than, so that work becomes something they have to do, not something they want to do. And I saw how this young man was very reactive in his approach to life. And I saw that that's not heading anywhere. So I came up with this project idea, which I've been working on, and I've expressed that through many channels, of a non-reactive decolonization. Because I saw a lot of sincere efforts at decolonizing, which is very reactive. So I started the project of a non-reactive decolonization. And I remember you were part of, the immersion course I led in Accra, I think 2 years ago. The theme of that course then was, a decolonization project. It's a non-reactive decolonization. And we call that course, transformation, how do we move from a deformed history to a transformed future? So and this book is part of the outcome of those kind of interactions that I've had, and so that's what inspired me to write the book. And what came out for me was that that the story of Africa, like the story of many people in the world, always start in the middle. They don't start from the beginning. For example, in Africa, when you write the story of Africa or you think about Africa, what comes to your mind first is that this is a territory that was, Africans were once slaves, or maybe they were colonized. So the book is saying that before slavery, before colonization, there was Africa. There was Africa. And there was a particular instance I started in that book. Even for me as a young kid in high school, we were taught that, River Niger in Africa was discovered by a Scottish explorer, a guy called Mungo Park. But I discovered that River Niger has always been at my father's backyard. How can somebody discover something we've always had? How can you discover somebody that you just met? So I said, was Africa a continent? Were Africans a people who were waiting to be discovered? So these are the kind of questions that I was wrestling with. So when you talk about discovery, when you discover something that's already in existence. So the whole essence is African story didn't start with slavery. It didn't start with colonization. It was a phase in the African journey as a continent. It was a phase in African journey as a people. They didn't start out as slaves. The continent did not start with colonization. They existed before Westerners came to colonize, before Westerners came to enslave. That's the whole story. And again, let me say it up front. I call it non-reactive decolonization because the book is not written as a blame game. Because I established one thing there. If slavery, for instance, was a trade, that means there was a buyer and you only have a buyer when there is a seller. So who is selling? Who is buying? That's the issue. So Africans can just blame the buyer. It was Africans who were selling Africans. So that's the main issue. So it wasn't a blame. So it was written from a position where everybody needs to take responsibility. Africans, the enslaved, and Westerners, those who were enslaved.
Interesting. I am thinking that it's going to be a really good book when it's published, and I think for many people in Africa too, and also around the world, to think through that and see from this perspective, because the people like myself, when we would have studied, and I shouldn't even say study, because it's just information being passed on to you, and not some kind of real in-depth studying to understand what happened and what was there, how did we come through history and all of that. So it's an interesting perspective. And something else that is striking is that narrative is like a really big claim to hang a whole continent on. And so when you think of it, Africa work crisis is not a crisis of capacity or character, you said. It's a crisis of narrative.
Yeah.
So just, maybe a skeptical listener, maybe an African employer who's struggling with absenteeism and poor follow-through. They might hear that, as this whole narrative as letting people off the hook. So blaming a story instead of holding people accountable. What would you say to that employer?
Yeah, it's not about blaming stories. Again, it's about, because leadership is one of the most, striking, inspirational quotes I've ever had of leadership is from Max Dupree, when he said that the primary responsibility of a leader is to define reality. So it's about reality. So when you say you blame the story, no, you don't blame story. Humans are products of stories. Yeah, we are what we hear, what we see, and then we believe. So narratives we are products of narratives. So for instance, you already said that, because if you're going to, for example, if you hire an African, you're already looking at somebody who is not going to perform well. That's the product of, narrative. Yeah. And the person might not be. He might be somebody, but you already, and that's where the issue of prejudice comes from. Prejudice comes from it's from two words. Prejudge. You've already formed an opinion before the person is given the opportunity to, to sort of introduce himself or herself. So it's not every African that we, for example, not follow through, not work. I am an African. I am not slack when it comes to work. I always tell my, my team members, I have never been late for a meeting. Never. I will never go late for a meeting. I'm an African. That attitude, that work attitude, is also because of the story I've come to believe. So it's not that, for example, I'll tell you something about pre-colonial, pre-slavery Africa. When they didn't go to formal school, the occupation in the African, space was basically agrarian. They were farmers. They didn't read it in any book, right? That when you farm a land, after a while, you need to leave the land to, to sort of get, get life again. So they leave the farm, they leave that land for a period. It was later that those things were written in books. So these are things that people learn, If before the age of fertilizer and all those kind of things, those things were organic. One of the things I also spoke about in the book was the depth of creativity of Africans. By the time this whole idea happened, one of the things that also inspired the thoughts was this whole practice of artifacts that were stolen from Africa that were taken away to Europe. And these artifacts at that time, when this whole thought started, was when these artifacts were being returned. The bronze work from Benin, the Okuko, all those kind of things were being returned. And I looked at those artifacts. They were sublime piece of art. This was before technology. These were things done by, manual labor. They were handwork. And if you look at the precision, the beauty, the intentionality, that has not fed into the current narrative of an African today. These are people who are never, in the Western sense, educated. If you put value on those artifacts today, there will be millions of dollars. Those are the kind of things I'm trying to address in this book, that before the West, Africa had a life. Africa had a system of government. Africa had a system, they have an economic system. They had their own culture. So in this book, I said, what colonization and slavery did was to modernize African civilization. They call it modernization. And that was deceptively done. It was to exploit African economic potentials and also demonize African spirituality. That's a direct quote from the book. And that this modernization, demonization, exploitation is what we know today about Africa. These are the things that has become our reality. It's as if that's what Africa is. So, but my country, Nigeria, was actually incorporated as a company. Can you imagine that? Nigeria was Royal Niger Company. For the Westerner, it was an economic enterprise. That is how demeaning slavery and colonization could be. Nigeria was a company. The company is in existence. It's now called UAC. It was called Royal Niger Company. So a whole society in the hands of the colonizer was a company. It was an economic enterprise.
Interesting.
Interesting.
So there's so many things that, we may not have considered or think through deeply into some of these things that you're bringing out here in the book. So Dr. Dot, tell me this. What would you say is one concrete workplace behavior that changes the day someone's narrative changes?
One workplace attitude, right?
Behavior. What
that
behavior?
will change.
One of it, yeah. That will change the day someone's narrative change.
When the narrative change positively?
Well, yeah, I would say in a positive way.
Yeah, if I want to put a word to that, it would be maybe two words. It would be responsibility and accountability. Knowing that if I don't work, maybe three. Okay, let me put three. Responsibility, accountability, and recognizing team. To know that a good worker, there's something I always ask people in my classes, and every time I teach for your organization too, this is something I ask. If you are to work with one, if you are to select, if you have the opportunity of choosing a workmate, what will you be looking out for in that person? And people mention a lot of things, and I ask them, these attitudes of the workplace that you mentioned, do you have it? Do you have it? And they go blank. I say, yeah, many times we want people to have what we don't have, and it is correct. I'll be looking out for, when you really begin to have the correct attitude to work, you recognize that, for me, for Shanti to succeed, I must succeed. for Shanti to have a good outcome of the task that she's involved with, I have to put in my own shift. So you recognize teamwork. That is one critical workplace attitude, that will begin to embrace when you begin to understand what work is. And I don't know if I have the liberty to connect that to what I'm writing in this book, that the original work attitude in Africa, work in Africa was communal. It was communal between people, family, and even divinity. That what I'm doing does not depend on me alone. So I must be responsible to make sure that I contribute my quota so that it will also add value to what the other person is contributing. So it's recognizing what others bring. And this is the primary study. When education began, and history has proven that education began in Egypt, and education had only one field of study: humanity. Humanity. And humanity study focused on two things: knowing what you bring to the table as a person. That is where we have all the studies about identity, about skill, about giftedness, about all those kind of things. That's where education starts from. The subject is humanity, being human. So know what you bring to the table. And then also recognize that there are others who also contribute to the table. That's community, that's teamwork. So everything we study in life is hanged on those two things. So if somebody is changing in the workplace, the person begins to see himself or herself as part of something bigger than himself or herself. I am not the workplace. I am not the product. I contribute to the product, and there are other contributors. That is, if everybody will do that, if everybody will work having the big picture, recognizing if an employer will recognize that my employee is a gift, if the employee too sees the employer as a gift, we will have workplace that is so productive, that is so fulfilling, that will bring out quality, that everybody will come. We won't be doing TGIF. We'll be doing, TGI day. Every day you should be thanking God for. And the unique thing for Africa is that it's not just between two humans. They also connect that to divinity, to a divine being, to God. Because, for example, the farmer knows that all I have to do is to put the seed in the ground. I don't have control over the sun. I don't have control over the rain. So I recognize that what I'm doing is sacred. It's sacred. So God is also, he has his own part to play. So mine is to put the seed in the ground. I don't control how it's going to grow. So that's the the work attitude. I don't know if I'm stretching that, but I love the question you asked, that when somebody is becoming transformed as a worker in the workplace, what is that thing? One answer, the person begins to appreciate team, and him or herself is a member of that team. He's not the team, it's just one aspect of the team that is critical. And even if it's to just if it's to open the door in the morning for the staff to come in, he sees the importance of that. Yeah.
I'm actually just thinking, what can we do actually to get people to that point? Do we go back and teach humanity? What do we need to do to get people to see that?
We just have to understand that everything we teach, right, is just a strand of the subject of humanity. And that's why I say that leadership, what is leadership? Leadership is learning to be human. What is wealth creation? Wealth creation is learning to be human. What is entrepreneurship? It's learning to be human. What is servant leadership? Is learning to be human. What is parenting? Is learning to be human. That's it. What friendship is? Learning to be human. So it's just, and that is the whole, maybe I shouldn't go there. Maybe I'll leave you to put the question, properly. I don't want to, preempt what you are going to say, but that's it. If we have it at the back of our minds that whatever we are teaching is a strand, is an aspect of humanity studies, yeah, then we will position it. It will be put in proper context, yeah.
I know that might take maybe days to dissect, but
Yeah.
let me ask you this question. You talk about the prosperity gospel, and you said that the prosperity gospel had replaced a work ethic with magical thinking about wealth and made poverty a personal spiritual problem instead of a structural one. You want to speak into that a little?
Yeah, because of one of the reasons why slavery, colonization had an easy entry into Africa was because Africans by nature are very spiritual people. Very spiritual. Yeah, they always believe that there's a realm beyond this, that the unseen realm is as real as the seen realm. So it's very easy for an African to believe that whatever we are seeing is spiritual. I'll give you an example. There's a well-respected pastor in Nigeria who said that the economic problem of Nigeria is spiritual, that it is spiritual. And the response to that is always, if we pray, the economy will improve. There's nothing like that. It's a fallacy. So the prosperity gospel has actually had a negative impact on accurate work ethic, work attitude. The main thrust of the prosperity gospel is if you give to God, you will get money. I said, no, that sounds to me like gambling. It's magical because it doesn't tick any economic principle box. Because if you are going to give, listen carefully, that means you have. Huh? If you are going to give, that means you have, because you can't give what you don't have. So the question is, we're not starting from the beginning. How did you get what you have? Right? So what the prosperity gospel does is they just start the story from the middle. Give, and then you will receive. How did you get what you are going to give? So the only way to get is to create value. And how do you create value? You work. So the prosperity gospel does not, sort of emphasize the place of working, the place of wealth creation, the place of adding value. That's why people go to work and they don't believe that work is where they're going to get, I don't know whether I told this real story in the book. I hired a lady in our organization who is a single mom. I don't know whether I told the story. Well, it'd be nice if the story is included so that they can print a graphic picture. This is a single mom who was working with us, and it was the day we were going to pay salary. It was a Friday. What this woman said was so sad and tragic, Shanti. She said, "Can I collect my salary on Monday?" I said, "Why?" They said, "Because when I get to church on Sunday, I don't want to lie. Because they will ask me to give. Because we have a program this weekend." That is how sad prosperity gospel can be. Nobody looks at the unique situation of this woman struggling to send her teenage boy to school. And she's so she doesn't want to lie in church, right? So she would rather have the salary paid on Monday, so that when she gets to church on Sunday, you say, I don't have. She will not be, she wouldn't be funny but sad. And that's why I call it magical. People believe more in, because it's magic that you give and then you get something back. I said, even betting companies don't tell you that. They don't give you guarantee. They say you might win. So coming back to prosperity gospel, the main damage that it does is it actually undermines hard work. So you have phrases like, it's not about hard work, it's smart work. I said, do you know that you can only work smart because somebody worked hard? Why do you have a smartphone? The person who produced the smartphone worked very hard to give you a smartphone. So these are the kind of narratives. So they believe in this quick fix, quick fix. I want to do, if you hear some of the prayers they pray in the prosperity gospel churches, they say, I want to walk like an ant and eat like an elephant. I said, now that is suicidal. Because if an ant should consume what is meant for an elephant, the ant will not, it will not survive it. Funny but dangerous, because now, Shanti, that's a narrative people buy into. So we no longer emphasize competence. We no longer emphasize character. If that's the narrative, we won't talk about ethics. So the end now justify the means. So that's why I have issues with prosperity. I have issues with prosperity gospel. So it's magical. And I always say that the most prayerful societies are the poorest. Yeah. They're the poorest. No continent prays like Africa. No race prays like Africans. But Africa is still the poorest in terms of infrastructure, in terms of all those kind of things. And look at it. Africans abroad, they do better. Because when Africans are put in a position where they have to work really hard, they produce. So what Africans need to do, first of all, when they travel out, is to, first of all, rid themselves of the African narrative and pick on a human narrative that hard work pays, innovative work pays. And these are things we had by nature. Yeah. That's the point I'm trying to make about prosperity gospel. Because where they preach it the most, the only person that benefits is the preacher.
I'm thinking honestly right now, what are the preachers thinking when you say all of that?
Yeah, I'm just giving them basically like a diagnostic report. Yeah, I'm giving them a diagnostic report. They should just look inwards. Maybe I'll make this personal. I don't know if you and I attended the same church while in Accra. That high-tech church that we took the students to in Accra. The pastor wore a gold wristwatch. I was looking at the guy, a gold wristwatch. The shoe was, alligator skin. But you turn around, look at the congregation. Yeah. So that's a graphic picture of a prosperity gospel, oriented church. So they don't have any, they can't tell me, because the picture speaks for itself. It speaks for itself. And these poor looking people keep going to the platform to go and drop money, to go and drop money, to go and drop money. It was it was tough to watch for me sitting down there.
I mean, there are things that are highlighted, and it comes back to that everybody still will choose what they want to believe in and what they will do.
Yeah.
But, at least it's been highlighted, and it's something to think about. When people are going to read your book, it might trigger something to start thinking differently on something. Yeah. So I'm going to leave that one there. ask you
Yeah.
this question. Because
Okay.
I hear about Ubuntu a lot. Even in Guyana here, people will start talking about Ubuntu. So I'm just, tell us a little bit, what does Ubuntu grounded governance actually look like in practice?
The word Ubuntu itself, that's where we need to start the conversation from. What's the meaning of Ubuntu? Ubuntu means being human. That's it. Ubuntu says, I am because we all are. And it goes back to the study of humanities that I said. The problem I have with Ubuntu right now? When you hear Ubuntu, we want to Africanize it. Africans want to own it. Ubuntu is not African. Ubuntu means human. Every society should operate on the philosophy of Ubuntu. It would not be sustainable if we wrap Ubuntu with an African wrapping paper. Ubuntu means human. The thing is, it was practiced more in African context. It doesn't mean, it's a human philosophy. Maybe the channel that we've seen it is African. But the way Africa should do it is to steward it and serve it to the world, not own it. It should be something we steward. So Ubuntu basically, an Ubuntu governance, sometimes people think it's democracy. No. Ubuntu means I am because we all are. It's recognizing the value of everybody. The value of everybody. So that should inspire our leadership, that should inspire our work style, that should inspire family. Ubuntu says a dad, a mom is not superior to the child. They are only different and unique in terms of responsibilities. Yeah, that's Ubuntu. But you see, there are only two perspectives of leadership. When we teach leadership, there are only two perspectives. You can group others under it. It's either empire or kingdom. Empire is there's an emperor, and then there are others. Kingdom is a domain of kings. A domain of kings. That's what it means. A domain that is made up of kings. And these kings, they have their different levels of responsibility, tasks, authority, but everybody is a king. Every human being, and that's why when I teach leadership, I say leadership is ontological. Every human is a leader. Every human is a leader. So Ubuntu is humanity, being human. That's what it means. So the Ubuntu philosophy is the recognition of the dignity of every human being. The dignity of every human being. Ubuntu is gender blind. Ubuntu is racially blind. Ubuntu is tribally blind, whatever. Ubuntu is human. And that's the way we are. No human being is born African. No human being is born Indian. No human being is born Western. We're all born as humans. African is a land, is a land narrative. Being Western is a land narrative. Being Indian is learned. If I live in India and I give birth to my children in India, they will have Indian accent because it's learned. Yeah. If you live in Nigeria, you give birth to your kids here, they will speak like Nigerians because it's learned.
Yes.
These are the kind of things that Ubuntu philosophy promotes. That's what it promotes. Yeah. So Ubuntu, my challenge right now is, I just read an article recently that says that AI, there's a way we Africans look at AI. No, I said no. There's no African way of flying a plane. There's no African way of driving a car. The car has its own kind of mechanics, its technology, is, the operation. You engage the gear the same way. There's no female way of driving a car. There's no male way. So these are the kind of things that Ubuntu philosophy promotes.
I was just wondering, would you have any idea, like in Africa, which country actually does this well?
If I'm looking at models right now, where the Ubuntu practice, I think the person that really popularized this in recent times was Bishop Desmond Tutu, who actually started talking about Ubuntu again. But I think Ubuntu has been used to sort of restore or recover from the Rwandan genocide. Because I spoke a lot about the Rwandan experiment in the book, where I said when they were going to get out of the genocide, where millions of people died and all these kind of things, was they had to go back to pre-colonial days. Because the original Rwanda had no tribal differences. It was colonization that emphasized Tutsi, if you watch the historical documentations of what colonization did and eventually led to the genocide, it's tough to watch. Where the fairer you are, the more superior you are as a human. If I got to a point where they measure people's forehead, they actually brought out a ruler. The longer your nose, they classify you as as Tutsi. If your nose is flat, you are Hutu. I mean, that is how evil that thing was, Shanti. Yeah, that's how evil it was. That if you are fairer, you are superior to somebody who is darker. Yeah. And that's how the division, and because the whole principle of empire kind of leadership is divide them so that you can conquer them. If people unite, you can't control them. But once you divide them, that is where the Tutsis also bought into the narrative, started seeing themselves as superior to the Hutus. And the Hutus reacted, called them cockroaches, and they started killing them. But Paul Kagame came and one of the things he did was to now say, no, we were never like that. And he introduced their pre-colonial legal system that they call the Gagaka, where their legal system was not based on perpetrator-victim. It was reconciliatory. So courts were not places you go to where there is a criminal and there is a victim. It's a reconciliation, And if you go to Asia, where you see that kind of a thing, I mean, Singapore that everybody is singing these praises today was, it was racial. They had Malays, they had Chinese, but what Lee Kuan Yew did was to say, make it a law that if you are here, you are Singaporean. You are not Chinese, you are not Malay, you are not, So unity is Ubuntu. So I can, we have not actually seen it. Because Desmond Tutu brought it out in a way to actually deal with the problem of apartheid in the Truth and Reconciliation Committee that they had after apartheid. That was where the word Ubuntu became popular again. So can we say that there's a place where it's been practiced today? Yeah, it's being practiced. We've not really seen the height of it. Ubuntu should be global. Because there's no society today where you don't have divisions. Look at how racism has come back to the United States. I'm very sure in your own context too, there are divisions. Yeah, it's all over the world. So the world needs to go back to Ubuntu. And that's why I'm challenging Africans. Don't own Ubuntu. Don't own it. Steward it. Offer it. And then model it.
Yep. I think the modeling part of what we need to start seeing.
Yeah.
I'm just, I was thinking, in those days you had more this division based on color. Now with all of the mixed marriage,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, look how the
You
world
know,
has
that was a
changed.
crime. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I have one
It's
last
it's
question. Uh-huh.
good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one last question, and then I'll leave it up to you what you want to close out our time with. So you say the church should commission marketplace workers the way it commissioned missionaries. What does that kind of commissioning or ceremony will actually look like?
Good question. You know, a lot of people do some work because, and the way they look at it is based on other people's perception of it. You know, so I was challenging faith communities, even families, to bring some sort of validation to whatever people do. And we've been able to model that in our organization. If you finish high school, it's like a commissioning ceremony, what we call graduation. You know, the only difference is there's no title. Nothing deceives like title. It deceives when you know, overemphasize title. So if somebody just finished learning how to sew, have a whole ceremony. And this is something Africans thrive in. Africans value ceremonies. So let ceremonies be functional and meaningful, you know. So commission the way you say you ordain somebody to become a pastor, you ordain somebody to become a bishop. Also ordain somebody who just learn a trade. Even marriage should be like an ordination ceremony because you are going into the ministry of another level of relationship, which is going to lead you to parenting, right? It should be seen as ministry. It should be seen as sacred. The way you commission somebody that is going to a mission field, because marriage is a mission field. The workplace is a mission field. You know? Yeah. Lead to influence as an organization. It should be seen as a mission field. Because you have a mission, I'm very sure your organization has a mission statement. Because it's a mission field. So anyone that is joining that organization should be seeing that, hey, your onboarding in your organization should be like a commissioning. So a letter of employment is your commissioning certificate. That's how to see it. You see, the work attitude will change. It will change. But when we do commissioning and then we just emphasize that event, not the process, and then the title is a crown, it will never produce anything. So what I really want you to take away from this book is that I'm just stoking a fire. I'm just inviting people to a conversation. That's why the book doesn't really kind of have a conclusion, and to also promote my project of non-reactive decolonization, I actually invited a colleague of mine, Dr. Les, to write the epilogue. Dr. Les is a Western, so that it's not, I yielded the floor to a Westerner to also have an input in the book. So it's a conversation. And I'm really challenging everybody. I'm inviting everybody. I want to thank you, Shanti, for giving me the platform, to come and actually talk about this. Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And, the whole concept of everything that you're talking about here is very interesting. And I think sometimes many of us don't know a lot of things that, before we were born and,
Yeah.
the whole world got colored into something else. And we don't even know where we came from and what was there. How can we learn from that? And it seems like based on what's happening now, as you said, we need to go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
there and how can we live better, the whole aspect of humanity. And it's just really interesting. I found it very interesting. And,
Thank you.
your viewpoints and everything that you shared there. And I'm sure that our viewers also will learn a lot through what we talk about here. And then also, as soon as the book comes out, Dr. Dot is going to post a little comment of a link.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Go
drop the link on
and
your,
get it
yeah,
from Amazon and
yeah,
read it, and just open your mind into understanding the stuff that maybe you never even thought was there,
yeah,
and see it from a different angle too. And it's not about judgment or this is right, this is wrong, but just to open your mind to just have a different worldview.
yeah,
So that's my thought on it here. And we do, I would say, as we both agree, that many of the workplace problem is not only Africa, going through that. It is the entire world right now.
yeah,
And I think, if we can learn from each other, that we can see how do we fix this problem. And I really love that concept of Ubuntu, and I keep your words just now says value everyone.
yeah,
Value everyone. If we go into every conversation or relationship, I'm gonna value this person.
absolutely.
The whole aspect of how we
Yeah,
think and see things will be totally different. So
exactly.
I really love it, and thank you so much. I know we went a long time, and I appreciate your
Yeah,
time coming on this program here and talk about your new book. And yeah, we look forward to hearing more. And
yeah.
I know that you're going to be on our program more too, so we're going to keep learning from you, Dr. Dot. And
Thank you,
so
Thomas. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shanti, for having me and the opportunity to be able to talk about the book.
you're welcome. So to our
Yeah,
viewers, do share this this session that we had there really interesting. Share it with your viewers too, and even give us some comments or any question that you may have for Dr. Dot. Maybe something he said you totally don't agree. That's okay. But you can share your thoughts, and he can give you his opinion too. And I think that's where our emotional intelligence comes in, that we don't be judgmental
absolutely.
and we can actually have a conversation. So
Yeah.
guys, take care, and we'll see you in our